Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm at an undisclosed location in sunny California, outside, because we can do that out here.
You look kind of like a retired person, I got to say. I mean, our audio podcast audience won't see you, so we should tell them you look like you're out on some veranda or something with sunlight streaming in.
I'm in the comfy chair, as Henry Rollins said, and they'll come and move me then to inside later and feed me dinner and then put me to bed.
There is a kind of assisted living look to it, because what is that shirt you're wearing?
It's just a blue shirt from Unique.
Okay, yeah, I guess I mistook it for an assisted living shirt.
No, I'm trying to convince. Ben Smith wrote this hatchet job on me where he said I was
quoted in that hatchet job. I did my best to make it as hatchety as possible. How did I do?
Thank you, Bob. You weren't as well, anyway.
We will link to that piece in Politico. It was quite some time. It was quite some time ago. You must be pretty.
It was in BuzzFeed, but all anybody remembers from that is that he said I lived in a small apartment, and these millennials they take it as God's punishment if you're not making money. I didn't realize that it was like a terrible thing not to have money.
I thought no millennials had money. I thought it's millennials who don't have money.
Right, but if there's this, they rag on you if you're not a big success in the conventional world, which seems like very anti-left-wing thing to do. But anyway, so everybody says, "Oh, he's being punished for voting for Trump. He's a dumpster diver living in a small apartment in Venice." Mm-hmm. So I now have to show that I'm living large, Bob, and I'm gonna pan, and you see all that out there, all those buildings in the distance.
That's not the ocean, is it? That's not the ocean.
No, those are buildings, Bob. This is all mine.
All of that real estate is yours? All of that real estate?
I have a huge plantation-like, shouldn't use that word. I have a huge compound here in the middle of Los Angeles, and I'm doing fine.
Okay, that'll be the word we'll get out. I should introduce this, because millennials are a good example of people who may be so young that they don't actually remember that you are a co-founder of Blogging Heads TV. This was before you went to the dark side and voted for Trump. But some, do you know how long ago that was, by the way?
How long ago I voted for Trump, or how long?
No.
We started in 2003, didn't we?
No, 2005. So it's 14 years. And anyway, you're Mickey Kaus. You're Mickey Kaus. You were also a pioneering blogger. And we're also the subject of an unflattering profile by Ben Smith.
It was fine, except for him saying I lived in a small apartment.
There was that. There was also, come on, admit it. There was also the kind of like, what the fuck happened to this guy vibe. You remember that part, right?
Yeah, but I expected that. But I read it through. I thought it was fine. Mm-hmm. And then I started getting all this grief because of the small apartment. What can I say? Anyway, it's now out of my system, Bob.
You've forgotten that. You don't even remember the piece.
I don't even remember it. This will remind me when you post it. So
okay. So what are we going to talk about? I mean, obviously, at some point, Trump should come up, since it's a good example of a subject that divides us, and we encourage open and vigorous debate on the Wright Show.
Let's start with Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein. Now, you were talking about Jeffrey Epstein before it was cool. I mean, you were, probably 10 years ago on Blogging.
Yeah, I've been on his case for a long time because I knew about it. I think I was on his case even before he copped the sweetheart plea in Florida.
That's possible. I guess, wait. When was that?
I think it was 2008, maybe, something like that.
Well, early on Blogging Heads, you were talking about how Bill Clinton had flown on this guy's jet. That's the first I heard of him.
Right. Well, I've been meaning to link to places where I talked about it years ago, but I can't seem to find them. I don't know why. It's a conspiracy, Bob.
A lot of those around.
So it is a conspiracy. I mean, this is my one point about Epstein, which is he's now dead. People are searching for his number two, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was photographed across town at a Burger King, except we don't think.
But you have a conspiracy theory about that, right?
Well, everybody has a conspiracy theory about that, which is it was probably not taken last week, and it seems to have been a photo taken by her lawyer, and who knows when it was taken. It could have been taken last week. She could be here, but she'd be sort of a fool to be here. But anyway, everybody's saying, well, now Epstein's dead. Let's focus on the victims, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the victims are real victims. That's why what Epstein did was so monstrous, because he took these underage girls and was as disgusting to them as he was to every other woman in his life, apparently.
Even Maxwell?
Well, maybe Maxwell may have been a genuine friend, yeah, but I know women who've gone out with him.
Oh, you do?
Some of them liked him, actually.
Maybe you buried the lead. You know women who dated him?
Yes. Why
don't you talk about that? That would be a scoop. What do they say?
Yeah, because I don't want to talk about it.
Oh, come on.
Anyway, the point is he was the center of a sex ring, a large sex ring. And right now I want to know how big was the sex ring, who was in it, and who enabled it when they should have known better. Who did he have blackmail power over, and why? Who was he sharing this blackmail power with? And how did he get his money? I mean, I want all these mysteries unraveled. And I also want to focus on the victims because they're genuine victims, but the story is at risk of becoming just another victim story when it's really a conspiracy so vast. And an interesting conspiracy. It's the sort of conspiracy you always thought was there, but it turned you felt paranoid for thinking that. Now it's there. It could have been small. It could have been big. We don't know. I think we should find out. It certainly involves Clinton. May involve Trump. I doubt it.
Okay, but here's my question about Clinton. Like, I agree that it's not implausible that Bill Clinton, given the opportunity to have sex with a woman, would take the opportunity. That part is plausible. And apparently, Bill Clinton did fly on his jet a lot and see a lot of him. I mean, you would know, right? Like, there was a lot of contact.
Theory. He says he only flew a few times. Others say he was on the log 27 times or something, and others say he secretly snuck on the island without being on any logs. And he denies ever being on the island.
Okay, but here's my question.
I think he was on the island, and he was on the island when there were women on the island. I guess there were always women on the island. What I don't know is if he indulged, if he gave in to his...
Right, and one question is, like, if there are a number of women who had sex with Clinton under those circumstances, wouldn't you think we might have heard from one of them? Maybe there's a reason we haven't, but I mean, we have the one.
I don't think there were hundreds of them, so it's a small number. So I don't know that. I mean, we haven't heard. We've heard like 8 people are suing him. They're thousands. So
suing Epstein.
Yeah, so there are a lot of people who are still in the shadows.
And are there allegations not in all cases on the public record? I mean, the one woman who has the picture of her with Prince Andrew, is her allegations are on the record, but are there some that aren't, that we don't know about?
She's sued. There are other people whose allegations are on the record, and I don't know how many people are there who are talking to reporters not on the record. But it's just... there are like 3 leading theories for how this guy got his money, okay? One is he was just a money launderer, and apparently you can make a lot of money laundering money. I don't know the specifics. Some people say hedge funds in themselves are good money launderies. I'm sort of skeptical. Seems to me money laundering is more complicated than that. But anyway, one is he was a money launderer. 2, he was a spy, and a spy, the leading candidates would be Saudi Arabia and Israel, and maybe the U.S. I mean,
now, by the way, Maxwell, how do you pronounce her first name?
Ghislaine.
Her father, Robert, the media baron, turned out to have been involved with various intelligence agencies, right? I mean, he his story, right?
I don't know his story. I know he was...
he dies mysteriously on a yacht named after that very daughter, like a couple of days after it's disclosed that he had... Or alleged in the newspaper or something that he had been an Israeli intelligence asset, and I'm not sure Israel was the only country. This is like Wikipedia level stuff about him.
A lot of people think he was killed. He was a press baron.
Right. Well, he was a press baron.
He looted various pension funds, or his kids were charged and acquitted with looting various pension funds.
He did do that, apparently, yes.
And So yes, so he may have been an intelligence asset,
but I hadn't heard serious allegations that Epstein.
Well, let me lay it out for you. One is he boasts about his friendship with MBS. That could be intelligence. It could just be he's a friend. It could be they're giving him money. He, according to Acosta, when he was cutting the sweetheart deal, he was told
Acosta was the prosecutor at the time it was cut,
Acosta
and then
was the U.S. attorney, later Trump's attorney, Secretary of Labor, just resigned as part of the scandal because he cut a sweetheart deal, and he says he was told Epstein belongs to intelligence. Leave him alone. Okay? So by a higher up. So that's evidence. And virtually everybody he was involved in is pro-Israel in some way. So Dershowitz, Wexner, there's a whole sort of tinge of pro-Israel. Israel and the Saudis wouldn't.
Right, he's got a pretty vast network. Are you saying like all these academics and stuff? I mean, who is
no, but the main Wexner was sort of the main guy in his life.
He's the Victoria's Secret guy.
Right. He's America's one of America's leading retailers. He's a billionaire. He does the Limited and Victoria's Secret operating out of I think somewhere in Ohio. I think Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the third theory. The third theory is all this money comes from this guy Wexner. So those are the three leading theories.
Who claims that once he understood what a horrible person Epstein was, he severed all ties. Although subsequently,
he said Epstein stole millions of dollars, but he hasn't sued to get them back.
But didn't some of Epstein's money go into foundations or something controlled by
Wexner? That seemed to be repaying the money that Wexner thought was stolen.
Okay.
But that doesn't explain how Epstein got $500 million.
For people who haven't been paying close attention, so at some point Epstein became like a super trusted associate. He even had power of attorney for this guy who started Victoria's Secret and has a ton of money. And the appeal to Epstein is kind of obvious. There's these Victoria's Secret models that he can say need to audition for him, which he apparently did on at least one case, audition in a hotel room. And by the way, that was the very first allegation against Epstein was that woman said, screw you, once she understood what he wanted, and actually called the police, right?
I didn't know that.
Yes, I think that's his first run-in with the law. Epstein was while working for this Victoria's Secret guy, or at least the first run-in of a sexual nature. She accused him of something that's on the books.
Oh, well, yes, and Wexner's defense is, well, this guy was highly recommended, so I gave him power of attorney over my $1 billion fortune. That doesn't add up.
No, I've never done that for someone highly recommended. No.
Yeah, you have to be a little more than highly recommended. So either he's the Svengali of all time, the what's the word, Tartuffe to
what does that word mean?
Tartuffe is a play where this
Bengali-like figure
inveigles himself. Right.
Okay.
Leon Wieseltier was once described as the Tartuffe of Washington.
Hey, why wasn't Leon? Leon has not been caught up in this, right?
I have no views on that, but it was.
Wait, does that? No, never mind. This is getting a little too much like Page 6.
I would like to know what Leon thinks about this, but I don't know.
Okay.
I think he would have a good line. It's the sort of thing that certain people probably know what was going on. I'm not one of them.
You knew more than most before most did. I'll say that.
The other theory is that this is what you do with a guy when you're in love with him, right?
Wait, who does?
Not that there's anything wrong with it.
Oh, wait. Do you have like a homosexual theory about this?
There is a homosexual theory about this.
With you, there's always a homosexual theory. Which is okay. Which is okay, but you have a lot of these, right?
Well, this is crying out for some sort of giving a guy who has not much business experience power of attorney over your vast fortune is not something you do for a business reason, so you look for another reason.
Okay, but do we know that Wexner's gay? I
do not know.
And there's evidence that Epstein, certainly, to put it mildly, had a heterosexual side, right? And there's no evidence that he was gay. So this is, anyway, we digress. Let's move on beyond this particular theory.
You scoff, Bob. Don't scoff at kausfiles.
I've never knowingly scoffed at kausfiles.
So anyway, so that's just where things stand, and I'm worried that the story is going to peter out because Epstein, the interview, he's looking sort of sad and pathetic now. It's not looking like a vast conspiracy. It's looking like his little pathetic $500 million fortune. He's dead. The fortune is going to be split up, and as Ann Coulter says, the only way the press is going to stay interested is if they think Trump is involved. So,
well, Trump is somewhat involved.
He's somewhat involved, but they think they're going to be able to get Trump. So I think we should start spreading the rumor that Trump killed Epstein, because that's the only thing that'll.
Yeah, but I don't think what seems not inconceivable to me, given the fact that the Trump administration is in charge of the prison in which a surprising amount of laxness permitted Epstein to commit suicide. What seems not crazy, although I think it's probably not the case, is that word was sent, to the prison that, your overseers wouldn't exactly mind it if Epstein were left unattended for a while, notwithstanding his recent attempt to commit suicide.
It's possible. There's so many people that could have done that. I'm told the prison is controlled by a vicious Dominican gang that everybody's scared of.
Wait a second.
You could just
Wait a second. The Trump administration lets vicious Dominican gangs run its prisons?
These are New York prisons. They're horrible.
You mean the inmate? You mean in terms of where the power is among inmates?
No, yes, and in terms of also power over the warden. I mean, the
come on.
The show. No, New York. New York prisons are horrible places. On Rikers Island, everybody has a knife which they've stored in a body cavity that can't be searched. So who has the power? The inmates with the knives or the other people? The Dominicans, people are scared of them in part because they use voodoo, which scares people. Anyway, the Dominicans.
I hope you're not steering us toward a sermon on immigration, Mickey, but it could be.
No, it's entirely possible he was just killed by fellow inmates who don't like pedophiles. That's another theory. It's entirely possible he's acting on other people's orders. It's also possible that he actually committed suicide the way the medical examiner said he committed suicide. The jury is out on that. I would say that's at least a 50% possibility. And so we just don't know. But I'm just saying that the idea that Trump gave an order is one of the least likely possibilities, and Barr seemed genuinely upset that this guy had died.
Oh, give me a break. I mean, naturally, he's going to act upset. He's the guy who screwed up. He is responsible for that prison, and he had ample warning that they had a very high-value prisoner who had tried to commit suicide, apparently, and should, at all costs, be kept alive precisely because of the number of influential people in principle implicated. If he's a serious attorney general, he would have at that point sent a direct memo saying, let's be diligent, don't leave this guy alone. He failed to do that, and he's covering his ass, Mickey. Come on.
He would have been calling the guy twice a day to make sure.
Exactly.
Totally,
failed to do that. And then you say, and then he puts on this big act about how upset he is with, he's going to find the responsible party. Dude, look in a mirror, first of all, and you buy the act 100% like, oh, golly, he seems really upset. Give me a break.
I did sort of buy the act. Sometimes acts seem genuine, sometimes they seem like acts. This seemed genuine. But I could be wrong. You could be right. It's definitely his responsibility, and he definitely
cynicism comes and goes, man, I'll tell you.
What comes and goes?
Your cynicism. It kind of has a weird way of disappearing when it could be appropriately directed at somebody in the Trump administration.
No, you've never had it. You've never had anybody say something to you that you were just convinced was true, that if they were acting, they deserved the Academy Award, so they probably weren't acting?
It was pretty good acting. It's just so obvious that he would generate that very act under these circumstances.
That's true. Anyway, it's his fault. It's also Epstein's lawyer's fault. They should have been calling every hour. It's also, it's also obviously the fault of the people in the prison. There are a whole bunch of people who are very guilty in this. Anyway, I'm worried that it's going to peter out and we're never going to find the names.
And your concern is that there actually are a lot of powerful people whose roles should be unmasked, and they won't be.
Right. Well, yeah. For example, this may be a segue into a topic you want to talk about. George Mitchell. Okay, he's one of the people mentioned.
Oh yeah, that seems one of the weirder ones, right?
Why would if it was a Mossad honeypot, as people say, why would Israel be interested in George Mitchell?
I haven't heard anybody say it was a Mossad honeypot. Is anyone saying that but you?
Oh yeah, they're saying everything, but Mossad honeypot.
So wait, in this scenario, the Mossad has used Jeffrey Epstein to acquire blackmail power over tons of influential people, including Bill Clinton and Donald Trump.
Well, yeah. I mean, the theory is they approved his operation to see what he could bring in, and it was successful enough for them not to roll it up. That would be the argument. But anyway, even if Epstein was just freelancing, George Mitchell was in charge of the Middle East peace plan under Obama, right? So
I guess he made an effort. I get it mixed up with Ireland, where he actually had some success with Northern Ireland.
He was involved with both of them. He was.
Yeah, I guess he kind of, he was for a while, the guy in Palestine.
This was in between those two. So it would have to be extraordinarily prescient if you're going to blackmail George Mitchell to know that in the future he would be in charge of Middle East peace. But, you collect them and some of them turn out to be winners. So that's the sort of thing I'm interested in.
I hadn't heard that one. See, I just have no idea whether the world actually works like this. I mean, I know there's a lot of skullduggery, but it's like a conspiracy.
Right, that's why it's important, because this is our chance to find out if the world actually operates like this. Maybe it is
fascinating, but I feel kind of guilty dwelling so much on Jeffrey Epstein because it's so kind of sleazy. But the alternative explanation. I mean, what I will say is this: there's also just reason to think that at the heart of this thing is a really weird guy named Jeffrey Epstein, right? Because he clearly, let me put it this way. If you just wanted to use him, if you just recruited this Epstein guy and were using him to cultivate this network, get these guys involved in prostitution, use it as blackmail, would you still have these kind of reliable reports that Epstein himself was a complete sex addict and addicted to kind of an odd kind of sex, like where these young women come in and he masturbates while fondling them, which apparently was a more than daily activity or something? I mean, the Epstein's a super weird and yet perversely talented guy in some sense. Theory has something to be said for it, right?
Yes, although I doubt his talents are what he claimed, which nobody believes he was a stock market investment.
No, I mean like charismatic. He must have been socially, although, Steve Pinker says he was just an off-putting guy that
I thought he might. I hear different things. Some people say he was charismatic. Some people say he was repulsive and creepy from the get-go. I would say the repulsive and creepies actually slightly outweigh the charismatics at this point. And that's an argument against it, that why would the Mossad get mixed up with this pervert? I mean, it's sort of beneath their standards. So,
although, you kind of take your assets as you find them.
Exactly. That's the counter argument.
Right.
So, now everybody is saying he was creepy, of course, but I don't have a clear line on that. I know several women who were creeped out by him almost instantaneously.
Who met him in person.
Yes. And I know some women who weren't, and I know some guys who found him charming. So he seems like an empty soul to me.
Well, I think that's the one thing we can almost safely conclude.
But wouldn't you detect that pretty early on? I don't know.
Well, there are people who are good at concealing their emptiness.
Yeah. Okay. So, yes.
Like you, I would love to know the answer. I'm not optimistic. And it's true that his untimely death has not increased the chances of enlightenment.
Yeah. So your call for the next topic. That was mine.
Let's see. I don't know. Current events. Well, one thing you tweeted about a little was the whole. I mean, we could talk about the Rashida Tlaib thing. I'd like to talk about that at some point. We can talk about Dean. Is it Baquet or Baquet? Baquet at the New York Times, editor of the New York Times, and the whole controversy over whether he should use the word racist in headlines and whether that's the complaint from the left that he should. The complaint from the right is that in handling that issue and talking to his staff, he revealed that actually the New York Times is a left-wing propaganda outlet.
Well, he realized that not unlike the warden being bossed around by the Dominican gang, he is bossed around by his millennial anti-Trump readers. He's not completely in control. As has been pointed out in several places, the New York Times doesn't get its money from advertisers anymore, who traditionally wanted it to be neutral and objective so they didn't get involved in politics. It's being paid for by its readers, who are intensely political at this point and by and large hate Trump and want the New York Times to be their weapon against Trump. And so they're annoyed when he doesn't go, all the way in terms of making it an anti-Trump weapon. It seems idiotic. The idea, if you call him racist in the headline, that's just going to devalue the word racist. And the whole power of the New York Times is there's some people who still think it's objective. So when it says something, it means something. If they're constantly calling Trump a racist, then he's only going to appeal to people who already think Trump's a racist. It's not going to convince anybody. So it's an idiotic demand, but millennials have been known to be idiotic, and they unfortunately have real power in our country, Bob.
Okay, but wait, I mean, let's be clear. When you say millennials, are you talking about Times staffers who gave him some trouble, or are you talking about
the guys who are giving him trouble are the guys I was talking about. Every organization apparently is terrified by the millennials it hired. Why did the Fortune 500 Business Roundtable people suddenly say we're not maximizing shareholder values, we're maximizing stakeholder values and employment in our communities? It's because they wanted to keep their millennial employees happy, according to what they think.
I think you're overstating the millennial influence. I mean, first of all, when you said, you've got this with the New York Times, you've got this, the inmates are running the asylum analysis, but that can mean two things. It can mean the staffers, and apparently you would emphasize millennial staffers, although most of the kind of high-powered staffers probably actually aren't millennials, or it could mean the subscriber base. I mean, that's what I thought you meant at first, and those aren't mainly millennials, probably. They're just ideologically motivated people, right? There's two things going on. There is a change in the business model. You're right. The Washington Post and the New York Times are increasingly dependent on readers who, whether they understand it or not, I think, subscribe to these periodicals, at least, digital subscriptions, because they see them as ideological allies.
Right. And there was a huge bump in subscriptions after Trump was elected, too. Mm-hmm. And you can assume that those people all hate Trump, right?
Right.
And they're getting increasingly desperate because the Russia thing didn't deliver. So now they're pivoting to the racist thing. And, whether that will work, I don't know. But,
but they haven't totally.
In a matter of desperate people, they're grasping at smaller and smaller straws.
Okay, but Baquet didn't throw in the towel on that issue. I mean, so this started with this headline in the wake of the El Paso shooting, I think, right, where Trump, the headline that the Times kind of apologized for, I guess, was President calls for unity. And that was kind of it. And people wanted a little more cynicism injected into the headline, right, given the fact that by pretty mainstream accounting, Trump had contributed to the climate that led to the shooting, which I think is not an implausible analysis. So it started with that, I think, and it became a larger issue about why don't you just call him a racist. I personally thought Baquet, who we should say, by the way, is African-American for people who don't know, who runs the New York Times, or at least is the editor, not the publisher. I didn't think he did a very good job of defending the decision not to apply the word racist casually as a matter of straight news reporting. But he did defend it, and he didn't throw in the towel on that, right?
No, he didn't throw in the towel on that. And he also said we're not going to be anti-Trump. We're going to be independent. But what he admitted that he'd done was incredible. He said, we built this news organization for one story, okay? The one story was Russia collusion. What an idiotic thing to do. You could obviously tell that the Russia collusion thing might, come up dry, as it sort of did. And so why would you build your newsroom around one story? Second, why build any newsroom around one story? It's the greatest newspaper in the world. It's supposed to be able to cover more than one story, okay? You build your news story to cover all the stories in the world. And also, there's news. You don't know what the next story is going to be. Obviously, you have to try to anticipate it and put resources where it's going to happen. But
at the same time,
reporting whatever the hell happens.
At the same time, I don't think it's a new thing for newspapers to think like that. I got to think at some point the Washington Post said this Watergate thing is huge and we're not backing down.
No, I have a friend who, in 1987, was sent to Eastern Europe, which was all communist, because the editor said, we think something might happen there. Okay.
Right.
Smart move.
They have theories of the case, but theories of what the big story is.
Yeah, you have to anticipate it. But at the New York Times, it was sort of more than that. You wouldn't we built our newsroom around this one anti-Trump story, and then it came a cropper. So now we're shifting to this other anti-Trump story, which is his character, by which we mean he's a racist. That's a new kind of journalism, and it's making public what everybody sort of suspected about the New York Times. Even though he tries manfully to be independent, he's obviously losing the battle.
We should say this comes from a conversation he had with his staff that was not designed to be public, although I got to think he understood that in the contemporary world, it's going to become public. In any event, Slate ran a kind of a more or less a transcript or an edited transcript or something.
Right, at least.
And so you're, and I haven't really read it, but I'll take your characterization as certainly one that's out there. That is the critical characterization of what he said. I mean, look, you're right. The media landscape. I mean, there's a combination of things. The economic underpinnings of media has changed, and the advertising model ain't working because all that money's going to Google and Facebook,
right.
And that leaves them looking for digital subscribers. And this crisis coincided with Trump, more or less. And it turned out that a way to get digital subscribers is to, well, at a minimum, have a lot of like Trump-related scoops or be the first person to, and the kinds of headlines that especially for a well-educated American audience, are going to get a lot of clicks, are going to tend to be critical of Trump. And so, I don't know that they ever, made a decision to join the resistance, but they definitely have, I think both the Post and the Times, not so much the Wall Street Journal, have moved in that direction. And but I will say that in this case, Baquette is being criticized for not moving far enough, and he's to some extent holding the line, right?
He's trying to hold the line. I don't know, and keep in mind that first, the New York Times wasn't very good even under the Bush 2 administration. It was practically in the resistance as far as I could see. So
except for the part where they dutifully reported the lies coming out of the administration that got us into the Iraq War, except for that part.
Correct. Except for that part.
Yeah, well, that was a big part.
Keep in mind, a lot of people on the left were supporters of the Iraq War, as you
I
well
remember it well, dude. Could we pause and point to a notable exception?
Right.
Thank you.
We've been through. I've been accused of dwelling too much on this, but John Alter, Jacob Weisberg, Bill Keller, all sorts of people who are on the left. Look at this. Look at the debates on Slate. Supported the Iraq War. Okay,
can I just get on a hobby horse briefly? Thank you. If you look at what has happened to the people who most momentously supported the Iraq War. What has happened to them? They're running the world. They all got promotions. I will only mention one example. Can you guess?
Elliot Abrams.
Oh, no. I mean, although that's a little mysterious. I mean, that guy is a felon, right? I mean, why? He's like a fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, and isn't he an actual felon?
Actually, John Alter, who is a liberal and, quickly recanted his support of the Iraq War.
Well, everybody did eventually. You don't get credit for that.
Did everybody? You got some credit.
I think David Frum did. I mean, almost all neocon, Max Boot did, for God's sake. You don't get credit.
I get annoyed, but I think some people didn't completely apologize, and I think they're editing the Atlantic.
I like John Alter. I'm just saying it's not notable that he recanted. Everyone recanted.
Anyway, thought Abrams got a bad rap. It was politicizing. I think he wrote a book review. It's politicizing it's criminalizing what should be a political decision. So,
well, he did lie under oath to Congress, did he not, Elliot Abrams?
I don't know the details. All I'm saying is people who do not have cause to like Elliot Abrams do not think the criminal conviction is something that should destroy his career. There are other things maybe that should destroy his career. He was also viciously anti-Trump, yet somehow he gets a job in the Trump administration where other people get bounced for being anti-Trump. So I don't know. You're thinking of John Bolton.
Well, no, that's different. I'm talking about people who are rehabilitated by the establishment. They're running like, mainstream media outfits. They're
You're thinking of Jeffrey Goldberg. I already brought him up.
I hadn't thought of him, but come to think of it, that's probably a plausible example. He is the one who asserted that he had evidence of an Al-Qaeda connection to Saddam Hussein, right? And reported that in probably the New Yorker, which, by the way, editorialized in favor of the war. An actual New Yorker editorial. We don't see those often. There was an editorial in favor of the Iraq War.
He wasn't at the New Yorker.
He was writing for the New Yorker.
Really? Oh, okay.
I think that's where the Al-Qaeda assertion ran. I could be mistaken, but I don't think so. No, he definitely was doing reporting. Jeffrey Goldberg was writing for the New Yorker for a while.
Okay. Anyway.
And then he picked up by the Atlantic. Anyway, yeah, now he's running the Atlantic.
I thought you were thinking of Jeffrey Goldberg. Who are you thinking of?
There's so many to choose from. I'll just let you be the one who named these names, and I'll just stay.
I've already named too many. I've named a bunch of my friends.
I gave you some affirmation for those. Those are good names. But anyway, it's all. You're right. It's like zero accountability in the foreign policy establishment and in the establishment.
The pro-war tilt in the New York Times was not just Judith Miller. Half of the American left was supporting the Iraq War.
Totally. More than half. Way more than half. I mean, if by left you mean just left of center, like liberals and the left, way more than half.
Yeah.
It was just the thing to do, except for me, for example, who was writing that it was a bad idea to invade. And I think you claimed that you finally came around, like your official position was against the war. Is that your claim?
And I've been dining out on it ever since. But
can you back that claim up?
Yes.
I have documentary evidence in the form of pieces I wrote.
I didn't exactly shine a light on it, but there is a tweet that I could link to. But I also held out, and I still hold out some hope.
Hey, Mickey, I don't think Twitter existed then, did it?
That in the very long run of history, it will turn out not to be such a bad thing.
But Mickey, did you just say you have a tweet? Because I don't think Twitter existed then.
It's not a tweet. It's a small blog item.
Okay. You did not come out in favor of the war. That I can.
So, no, I was against the war on legalistic grounds, which is if you read the UN resolution, it did not authorize what we did.
Perfectly good ground to oppose the war. That was part of my opposition.
Well, but I thought, we would invade and it would all go fine, okay? But we just shouldn't invade because it's illegal. So that was the lawyer's perspective. The Jim Fallis perspective, which is it would be a disaster if we invaded, the Council of Prudence was also turned out to be accurate, and I did not share in that.
Okay, well, you get some credit. Now, but on this New York Times thing, so I mean, if I were backhead, I think I would have said a little more like what you said. Like, I mean, first of all, I would have said, look, the New York Times, a lot of its value is being seen as an objective newspaper. But the other thing I might have said is, look, this is the longstanding position of serious newspapers that there are certain kinds of calls it's not their job to make. And traditionally, one of them has been racism, because, I mean, after all, racist, it's not some kind of objectively verifiable thing like a person's citizenship, A.
Right.
B, nobody goes around saying I'm a racist, right? People say I'm a Marxist, and if they say that, you call them a Marxist. But nobody says I'm a racist. And so it's not just the New York Times. It is it's a long-standing position of kind of serious newspapers in America that all kinds of unflattering but kind of fuzzy characterizations, right? Where there's not a clear definition that you can apply to see whether the term fits. In those cases, the newspaper just says alleged or whatever. And, you know, it's fine if you want to argue that we need to enter a new era where that should change. I would just like to see the argument actually had, right? Like in those terms, like, well, should the New York Times fundamentally change its character? But he didn't.
Boy, do I not want to sit through that argument.
What's that?
Boy, do I not want to sit through that argument. We have too many arguments like that. But
why? Because it's boring.
Yes.
But I mean, what I mean is, there doesn't even seem to be an understanding that this is a change people are asking for in the way journalism is done.
There've been 20, editorials and op-eds saying, I know normally we shouldn't do this, but this is unprecedented times, and this is an unprecedented threat, and we must cross this boundary line that we've always had. I guarantee you that you can.
I mean, my own feeling is just that the biggest argument against doing what they want Beckett to do is I honestly think it helps Trump. I really. And here's a good question: do you agree as a Trump supporter?
I think it's a close question. I think it definitely causes cocooning, causes polarization, and Trump people just stop listening to the New York Times, and so they lose a lot of their credibility. But they've already pissed away a lot of that, and I don't know how much credibility they have. And eventually the tide of, it's like the theory of the anti-war movement. A friend of mine said, "Look, it was wrong to break windows and to be violent." But in fact, it had the effect of bringing the war to an end because people thought society is coming apart, it's going crazy, we have to put an end to it. So if the Times starts acting crazy, they may think it's a horrible thing to do. They may think less of the Times, but they may think it's unfair to Trump, but they may also think, my God, half the country is going crazy. We have to do something about it. They're running around calling our president a racist. So I think it's a close question. I don't think you should do it, but does it help Trump or hurt Trump?
Well,
I don't know.
Certainly with his base strengthens his fundamental narrative, which is that there's the crooked media and these elites hate us and so on, right? Because
that's true. I don't know. I mean, my basic view is Trump's presidency. If you look at the large sweep of it, his appointments to the economy is good. His appointments to the Fed have been okay. His appointments to the court have been okay. Trade to be determined. We don't know what's going to happen on trade. The one issue where he is screwed up totally is immigration. And
can I just add one thing? If you ask, wait, let me just interject one thing, and I'll let you get to immigration. But I just want to say you missed a department. It's called national security, and he has filled his national security apparatus with crazy people who, if they have their way and follow their instincts, will get us into a war.
But they don't have their way, and we're in fewer wars.
Thanks to your man, Tucker Carlson.
We're not in wars at the moment that Trump wasn't left with. He hasn't started any, and he's trying to get out of the
constant battle to keep him out of one.
He's resisted involvement in Syria. I'm glad you brought that up. That's another. If you look at what's happened, that's another point in his favor.
No, wait. He said he would withdraw from Syria and got talked out of it by the Boltons of the world, and we're still there. We've got a ground presence in Syria.
Well, we have less of a ground presence than they wanted.
Way more than zero is what we're winding up with.
Anyway, I give him some peacenik points. You don't. But on immigration, his constant temptation is to try to buy off the base cheaply with like rhetoric. Oh, they're all against me, or things that are might be popular with the base, but don't really get to the main issue of immigration. And I think this public charge rule is sort of like that. What tests best with voters on immigration is that they're coming here and they're using up welfare money. Okay.
Wait, what's the public charge
rule?
Public
charge is you don't get a green card and become a citizen if you are going to be a public charge, i.e. if you're going to use welfare.
Right.
Welfare was always defined narrowly to be actual cash welfare, and Trump has now expanded it to include food stamps and Medicaid. There's been a whole controversy over that. And that's the sort of thing that it'll have a marginal effect, probably. I don't even know if it's right, but it seems like a cheap attempt to play to the base and to disguise the fact that on the big issues, which is changing the asylum rules, building the wall, actually putting some more enforcement mechanisms in place, and actually lowering or limiting immigration and shifting it to be more skilled, i.e. getting something through Congress, he's been a total failure. So he has to disguise the fact that he's been a total failure in the things that he promised to do by making these cheap appeals to the base. And railing against the media is just another one of those.
Well, he's been railing against the media forever, though. I think regardless of how things had gone on immigration, it's just a card he plays. It plays directly into the psychology of the base that got him elected in the first place.
As with welfare, I give the base credit for actually caring about the issues. Well, I think the concern about welfare.
Saying they don't. I'm not saying they don't have conviction and care about I think they do care about immigration. I'm just saying if you look at the overall psychology that helped him get elected, that big part of the narrative is these cosmopolitan coastal elites who, among other things, want to let people keep crossing the border, hold us in contempt, and will do anything to stifle us and our leader.
That's the background, but he said he would build the wall, and he hasn't built the wall. So,
well, he's inept. I mean, actually, I don't know whether a skilled politician could have gotten funding for that. I don't. LBJ, he would get it done before breakfast. LBJ had a kind of mandate that Trump never had, but
it's not a heavy lift. You sit down with Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi, and you offer them, you know what Ryan wants. He wants the tax cut. So you got him by the balls. And Pelosi, you have to offer enough Democrats something that they want. And the other part of it, which doesn't get talked about, is he had to decathect the issue. He had to make it not such a big thing. If you oppose Trump, you have to oppose the wall tooth and nail. He had to do something to drain the emotion from it.
That's precisely the point that I think.
Do any of that?
I think fairly early on that was a constant, and that's what I was going to say. When you say, "Well, I just do a deal with Pelosi and Schumer," well, no. From early on, partly because of his campaign rhetoric, but the wall became an iconic issue, and in a way, I think, in a way, a weird one, because the wall per se, although I'm opposed to it for various reasons, it's not nearly as cruel as some of the other things he has done and wants to do, which is like make, people who had been here a long time as upstanding, workers suddenly feel a kind of fear they hadn't felt. I think that is more cruel and immoral than building a wall would be, although I'm opposed to both.
The wall doesn't deport anybody. It stops the problem from happening.
Right, and I mean, there's nothing.
The dilemma of deporting people because they never get into the country.
Well, right. There's nothing. I don't see anything immoral about preventing, through like nonviolent means, people who are not legal immigrants from crossing the border. All countries do that.
Yeah. I should also. He is finally building significant amounts of walls, so maybe by election he will have built enough to satisfy some people.
You mean because the court said he can proceed with this diversion of Pentagon money toward the wall?
Yeah, he got like $1.5 billion in the budget. Then he's got a couple billion more in this drug interdiction money. Even though he's not allowed to build new wall, there's a whole bunch of old wall that is really just like a couple of logs that anybody could hop over. And if you replace that with an impressive fence, that's a big advance. So you'll be able to point to a lot of miles of so-called replacement fencing that is really in effect like a new wall because there was basically nothing there before. So he'll have a colorable argument, maybe. Yes, that's what I thought.
He'll have something he can show pictures of.
He's already showing pictures. It's just they're not miles and miles of pictures. They're
So here's a question: do you not agree with me that the way he's referred to illegal immigrants using terms like invaders does help create a climate in which things like the El Paso shooting are at least somewhat more likely?
Well, I think invasion's an inflammatory word. I've tried to avoid it when I write, and it's hard to avoid.
It'd be hard to succeed. Have you succeeded? Have you ever used it?
Well, a friend of mine told me, Mickey, your Twitter feed has gotten ugly, and I respect this person, so I went back and read it, and I had retweeted a tweet that had used it. I did not use it myself, but I retweeted. It was linking to some good article, and I overlooked the fact that they used invasion in the headline. So that may be guilty or not, I don't know. But it's a very easy word to use. It's used all the time in non-inflammatory contexts. It's actually a hard word to avoid. So I think this fuss about invasion is overdone, that he's so guilty by using the word invasion. My point that maybe
wait, you're saying it's a hard? Did you say it's a hard word to avoid?
Yes.
Wait, why is it hard to avoid?
Hundreds of thousands of people coming in the country.
Why is it hard to avoid a manifestly inaccurate and dishonest word? An invasion is something that's orchestrated by people who want to take over your country. This obviously isn't that. Why is it so hard to avoid using that word?
We use the word invasion all the time in words where it's not that.
Well, fine. There's such a thing as a harmless metaphor. But when you're dealing in an environment where there is ethnic tension, and by the way, that at least some of your followers, however misguided you may consider them, are flat out bigots and racists and hate Latinos, it shouldn't take a really high level of enlightenment to let you know that this is not a place to deploy that particular metaphor.
Well, I guess I have a different, I put less emphasis on the word invasion than, and I forget, there were like a dozen examples that people came up with of left-wing sites using the word invasion. I mean, it's used all the time. It's the obvious word if you're reaching to magnify.
For dangerous hyperbole, yes.
But I do think there's something about the anti-illegal immigration and the sort of restrictionist cause that lends itself to violence. I mean, all around the world, when there are immigrants, who are not, you don't want in the country, there's a temptation to beat them up.
Well, isn't that precisely the reason you should be careful with the way you talk?
Yes, I just don't think the word invasion is the bright line that signals you've gone into irresponsible territory. I think you should.
I think it's well past the bright line. I think rapists, all kinds of things are the bright line here. It's just this is a difference between you and me. You don't seem to. I just look back at history, and dividing lines between ethnicities are like super dangerous. They're volatile. Through history, horrible things have been done as a result of tension along those lines. So I think any reasonably mature, intelligent president would know that if you really have the country's interests at heart, you tread very carefully there, especially if you've got a message that, whether you mean it or not, is bound to pick up some support from, I don't want to say deplorables.
I don't think it's easy, because if you say, well, these are human beings. We have to treat them humanely. You're sort of telling them, telling the opponents they've won. They're here to stay. So there's not an obvious easy middle ground where you don't do anything to in any way demonize the people who some people don't want to be there and who are there illegally, while at the same time you don't grant them a de facto victory. So I mean, the whole point is they come here and then they appeal to our basic humanity. So I think one should strive for that, but it's not at all easy to do. And and people think Trump has gone beyond what people think Trump has been worse than he actually has.
Oh God, he's been so bad rhetorically on this. Come on, he's tried to push every emotional button you could try to push.
I guess I'm thinking more of the racism thing. He hasn't been used that racially charged language. He's been pretty charged on immigration. I agree.
Well, they're related, right? Because it's non-Caucasians who are coming across the border.
Well, but when the New York Times demands that we call Trump racist, they don't mean Latinos; they mean blacks.
Well, that's a different. No, he's been more careful there. So anyway, by the way, did you this a piece of trivia? I don't think anyone's interested in, but me. But my El Paso shooting was like less than half a mile from my elementary school. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
True.
The interesting thing about that, and it doesn't in any way detract from what you said, is a lot of these people, they seem to be, I want to shoot somebody up and I'm looking for a cause that will let me do it. So if you read the guy's manifesto, he said, the Latinos were not the target of my shooting until I read this New Zealand killer's manifesto, okay? That implied that he was going to shoot somebody, he was just looking for what the right target would be. And a lot of these people, they seem, he could have shot up the Walmart, he could have shot up somebody else, someplace else. He got lost, so he got hungry, so he went to the Walmart. There's some atmosphere to this where it's not, I have a cause, therefore I will become a shooter. It's I have a shooter, I'm a shooter, and then I look for a cause.
Well, I think there's definitely, in all kinds of these extremist shootings, I think these are unbalanced people. They might well have been poised to strike out in some fashion or another. And it's true that the presence of an ideology that's expressed in an inflammatory way and may even in some cases explicitly advocate violence, that directs their behavior, that directs the outlet for their rage. But that's not to say just because they might well have done something crazy that you bear no moral responsibility for creating a climate in which they're going to direct, they're going to become like mass shooters and target a particular ethnic group. Correct.
I'm just saying, like what about the Dayton shooter? What the hell was he about? I mean,
he was an example of somebody not directed ideologically. But I would say
we don't know.
Well,
we don't know if he was directed ideologically or not. He was a big Antifa, anti-ICE guy. Doesn't seem to have been the theme of his shooting.
No, his targets were not chosen with his targets bore no clear relationship to any ideology.
That's what we think, but we don't really know.
I think we do. But speaking of Antifa, this is not unrelated to the Trump racism question. There's a similar argument there. In other words, you were saying there are people who are aware that the old journalistic rules were X, but they say this is a crisis. We got to move to Y. It's the same kind of argument that's made with respect to Antifa, right? We've got to punch Nazis. We've got to rough up Andrew NGO, or spray whipped cream on him or whatever they initially did.
That's clearly counterproductive.
I agree, but not everybody does.
Much more so than whether calling Trump a racist is counterproductive. Initiating violence against the Proud Boys or whoever you're fighting, a small group is not really going to gain any adherence to your side. And B, those people clearly just like to fight. It's not about the fascists. It's about the punching, and they don't kill people. They just like to fight.
Of course, as usual, there's not that much of it actually happening, but especially in the current online social media environment, when it happens, it exerts maximal emotional reaction because it gets spread to everyone who would be pissed off by it. And, it's not like there have been that many. I mean, how many Andrew No's are there in the world? There's like Spencer got punched in the face. And then Andrew No, who, has a couple of times gone where there was trouble
the whole Charlottesville fight was, these two gangs were ready to rumble.
Yeah, that was a couple of years ago.
Right, but there was more than Andrew No there. That was like hundreds, dozens at least of people on each side duking it out, and the cops let them duke it out, which was a big mistake.
Well, for what it's worth, I mean this symmetrically. The egregious behavior on both sides of the anti-Trump line, it seems to me, gets magnified by social media. You get an exaggerated idea of how common it is. And I just don't think there are many assaults actually by Antifa. I'm against the assaults. And it seems to me the killer argument against it is no one would have ever heard of Andrew No, right? He's now got a huge following, which I guess Antifa doesn't want him to have. Well, he wouldn't have it if everyone had just left him alone, right? We'd never have heard of the guy.
Right. Well, they're foolish that way. On the other hand, they seize de facto control over not insignificant chunks of Portland whenever they want to, and the police have been leaving them alone. Maybe that's changed now, but
I think it's changing a little. Yeah.
It's not like they just beat up Andrew No. They actually exerted some power.
The Portland scene is pretty weird. That's an interesting. I don't really know what the story is there, but it's an interesting story that apparently has something to do with the fact that in Portland, the mayor actually is, by statute, the chief of police or something. There's an unusual relationship of the mayor to the police department. So he's kind of the police policy is more responsive to the base than it might otherwise be.
Right.
Anyway, so what else were we going to talk about? So you're not interested in the fact that I lived near the.
No, I knew you lived there. The interesting question is Portland the safest city in America? The pro-immigrant people say, well, it's filled with all these immigrants. Some of them are legal, and they're all minding their P's and Q's because they don't want to get shipped back. So it's the safest city in America. And then the Trump people who say no, immigration means crime, and it's all covered up by the media. And I don't have a clear idea on the larger question, but I especially don't have a clear idea on El Paso, whether El Paso is in fact a safe city or they're just covering up not reporting a bunch of vicious drug crimes.
I haven't heard that they're. I don't know that. I'd heard it is a relatively safe city.
I mean, it's a military town, right? So of course it's going to be relative.
Fort Bliss. That's why I lived there. My father was at Fort Bliss.
Right. So you would think that would breed security and safety and law-abidingness.
I don't know. I'm thinking about places I've lived. When I lived in San Francisco in the late 60s on the Presidio, believe me, there was more unruliness immediately outside the military base.
Well, that's San Francisco in the 60s.
Right. Well, but the point is they didn't have the kind of control you're suggesting.
But the dominance of the military over El Paso is a lot more than the dominance of the military over San Francisco. They're confined to this little ghetto by the Golden Gate Bridge.
I don't know about that. I mean, there are towns that are big retirement towns, like San Antonio, military retirement towns. And it's
Does Joe Rogan take a call, Bob?
That's an interesting call, actually. I can't tell you what that call is. I'll tell you afterwards. Joe Rogan. Speaking of Joe Rogan, have we broken his record? Oh, no, we're still 2 hours shy of it. Do you listen to Joe Rogan?
I do not. I know he's very powerful, and people on the right are actually very interested in getting on his show because it's a good hit.
Yeah. It's a huge hit. Bernie, I'm trying to turn this. Oh, get away from me. That's the kind of stunt Joe Rogan would pull. He'd throw the phone across the room. How did that work?
It was good. It was totally
unscripted. Yeah.
understatement.
Wait, how long can this thing go on? This is still...
It's very important. It's the president of the United States. He wants to get through to you.
It's actually more important than that.
Really?
They keep, from my point of view, yes, but I digress. What are we saying? Joe Rogan. Do you listen to Joe Rogan?
Jeffrey Epstein, in his will, has decided to fund blogging.
No. It's more important than that. But anyway, Joe Rogan. What do we say about Joe Rogan?
I just brought him up just because I thought you were about to take
fascinating phenomenon. I mean, I wonder if he gave. Do you know how many people watched his Bernie Sanders interview?
No.
I think that's probably now approaching 10 million views.
Wow. Okay.
And like the average like weeknight cable TV audience is what, 200,000 or something?
And he's actually a good interviewer?
Of a kind, yeah. I mean, he's seriously interested. I mean, he evinces actual interest in the guests and he pursues the conversation wherever his interest lies. So it's an authentic conversation. He's become this kind of intellectual dark web thing. Most of his shows aren't about that, but he was featured in the original New York Times story about the intellectual dark web. So that one of his functions is now as kind of intellectual validator. And I don't know about that, but anyway.
So the one thing we haven't talked about, speaking of Bernie Sanders, is the Democratic field.
Yeah.
Quickly, my take is
the Democrats are in trouble, right?
No, I think actually I'm shifting. I've had too many Trump supporters who are in fact suburban housewives who don't seem really enthusiastic about voting for Trump again.
There's a lot of that.
So,
but look at the Democratic candidates.
I think Trump may lose. Sorry, what?
But no, I mean, I've said this a million times, but it just seems like the Democrats don't have a single candidate who, like on paper, seems really well designed to beat Trump. That's not to say there's none I like. I'm just saying, as a number I'd be happy with as president, but they have to win the election. And I'm just saying none of the candidates seem really handcrafted to beat Trump.
But, Biden has the right centrist potential. He just doesn't have a winning personality to win a presidential election.
No, there's a bigger problem with Biden, and I was one of the first to say it because I can show you a tweet from like, I don't know, 8 or 9 months ago where I said it. But anyway, now it's conventional wisdom. He's really lost a step, and
he had always,
it's worse. It's appreciably worse. Go back and look at him in the debates. Now, granted, these are one-on-one debates; they're easier. But his debates as a vice presidential candidate, he was really good. He was pretty damn good.
He beat Paul Ryan.
Okay. No, wait. Didn't he also? No, he had to do it twice. Didn't he do Sarah Palin or something?
He must have done Sarah Palin. Yes.
Yeah, he really was good, and
but that was considered a draw. And the Ryan one, he was considered to have won.
He is losing his kind of thoughts and a lot more than he used to.
In 1988, when I was working for Newsweek, we bounced him from the race because of this ridiculous thing he said about I have a higher IQ than you do to some voter, and then he listed 5 academic accomplishments, 4 of which turned out to be BS. Yeah. He's always been talking through his hat and uncontrolled and a motor mouth.
Right.
Now the motor is just running more slowly. We're actually probably getting fewer gaffes than we would get if
we're getting a lot. It isn't just gaffes. It's like weird misstatements and just getting name. It's
those weird misstatements.
Believe me, you're going to see more of this, and it's going to be a theme, which leads to the question: can Bernie? What's that?
He's going to be overtaken by the pack.
By either Bernie or Elizabeth Warren, or do you think
there were 5 people? He may come in 5th in Iowa. Who knows?
Who else is in the serious running besides Bernie and Elizabeth Warren?
First, we don't know yet. I mean, Cory Booker can be a very appealing guy. For all we know, Cory Booker is going to get traction.
God, I hope not.
You can't tell. I mean, Gary. I operate on the Gary Hart paradigm. He was considered to have won Iowa because he got like 8% or something. Like it was unexpected. Okay. You can leap from very small percentage showings in Iowa if they're better than expected to larger in New Hampshire, and then you've taken off. So we just don't know. I mean, I would say Warren is the best position. She's also the best position ideologically because she's got the populism that steals a bunch of thunder from Trump. If she only made, immigration is the one thing where all she has to do is show some sanity on immigration, and she's in. Unfortunately, she can't show sanity on immigration.
I don't agree with that. I think she has, as a general election candidate, I think she has other problems. By the way, on immigration, if you're talking about the general election, in other words, sounding to Trump's base like you're not an open borders advocate, Bernie's already got more of a track record than she's got, right? I mean, Bernie said in a seemingly heartfelt way when that came up months ago, "You crazy? I'm not for open borders."
That was years ago, and he spent the
a couple months ago.
He's trying as hard as he can to cover up this appealing part of his.
I think he's leaving some breadcrumbs and wants to, but
he has some breadcrumbs, and other people have breadcrumbs. And Warren needs a few more breadcrumbs.
So, who do you think would be better positioned in the general election against Trump, Warren or Bernie?
I just think Warren. She seems to have a lot of energy. She's a fresh face. Bernie, he's become, he's become. We're sick of him. He's become tired.
You don't think that the Native American thing is a problem for Warren?
It's a problem that Warren has a lot of problems. The fact that people don't seem to like to work for her, that's another problem. But
I'm not sure that is a problem.
You can overcome any candidate is going to have big problems. The question is, can you overcome them? And I think she can.
Okay. I hope you're right. I just cannot. I don't know what I'll do if Trump wins the election, honestly.
Well, the left is going. It's a very troubling scenario if Trump wins the election. What does the left do?
It could get ugly, man.
It seems to be at that point some of them resort to extra democratic means, which is a very bad news. And there's one theory I developed which was obvious after the Florida recount, which is in a close election, the angriest side wins. So it seemed to be clear that after Florida, the Supreme Court and other people said, gee, if we give it to the Democrats, the Republicans are just going to go berserk. The country's going to be torn apart. Whereas the Democrats aren't that angry. So the Republicans won. This time the Democrats are angry. So tie goes to the angriest.
But you got more Republicans on the Supreme Court, or more, in effect, Republican sympathizers on the Supreme Court.
Even so, it's the sort of thing that Justice Roberts would. I'm not saying it'll be decided by the Supreme Court.
Roberts, I do put some trust in Roberts, not just in this kind of situation, but I do think he is very leery of allowing the court to seem like a Trump tool.
I think voters sense also that, gee, if we reelect Trump, the country's going to be ripped to shreds. So, and the damage is going to be permanent because the Democrats are so angry. If we reelect the Democrat, the Republicans will, toe the line for 4 years and nominate Josh Hawley, and we'll have a normal country again.
I don't think many voters even use that paradigm to think about it, honestly. But I think the Supreme Court may, but I don't think voters do. So what else? We should talk about our newsletters at some point. We could get into the Rashida Tlaib thing.
Sure, we're not going to have an argument over that, but go ahead.
Well, then we won't have an argument. What is there to say? Well, I think actually, as a tactical matter, I think it actually might have been a good idea for her to go over there once they rescinded the ban, even with the restriction placed on her speech, and then violate the restriction once she's over there. Like start doing streaming video from the West Bank showing people what it's like.
What are they going to do? What are they going to do? What are they going to do?
What are they going to do? Right. Are they're going to put her in prison over there? Good luck with that public relations situation.
According to NPR, she was ready to do that, but then, like Dean Baquet and his millennial base, the people on her side said you can't accept. You're giving in to Israel, and so she had to back out of it. But
But if she had actually advocated BDS from the West Bank, they would have forgiven her.
Are you in favor of BDS?
I haven't had a position, but I certainly, the idea that it's intrinsically anti-Semitic seems crazy. I mean, if anything would tempt me to like come out in favor of BDS, it would be like all these like laws that are really pretty damn insidious. What do you think of this? It's like these, laws that have been passed by state legislatures that use various kinds of leverage to discourage people from supporting BDS. So like you can't there's a famous University of Texas case, like the University of Texas cannot award a contract to someone because they came out in favor of BDS. I mean, that's just un-American. That's just a vile thing. And a number of states have passed laws like that because there's been a systematic, quote, pro-Israel lobbying effort on behalf of them. And I mean, that's so insidious. I almost think that alone would be grounds for just coming out in favor of BDS. I'm not kidding. It's like, it's sick. And it's amazing it's gotten as little attention as it's gotten, because when you think of, I mean, don't you agree, Mickey? That's deeply un-American.
I think it's a bad thing.
Okay. You don't sound quite as incensed as me.
You can get into a 1619 like argument whether McCarthyism and other bad things were an inherent part of Americanism or not. But various attempts to narrow the boundaries of free speech and say, if you're a communist, you lose your job.
Yeah, well, that was bad too. I don't know how many laws were passed to that effect. There probably were some by states. I don't know. Were there?
Yeah, I'm sure there were official. I'm sure if you were, I'm sure if there was an effort which I would support to drive the communists from the labor unions, that wasn't the government.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't like Rashida Tlaib. She seems like a horrible person. She's practicing identity politics
I don't think she's horrible.
I don't like identity politics, but
I think, she's done one thing that I thought was a big mistake, which was the impeach the motherfucker line. That's just, it's a mistake because it helps Trump. I mean,
it seemed very unmindful of her.
That was very unmindful.
Yeah.
But aside from that, look, I think she's Palestinian. She's genuinely committed to this issue. I mean, she's not just acting.
I didn't say she was acting. I said she was practicing identity politics. And the idea that these ethnic enclaves would, instead of nominating terrific champions for all sorts of issues, would nominate the ethnic activists is dreary, but, the society has a way of accommodating them. They're the first generation of ethnic activists, and then they, gradually graduate into other things. So
what is the ethnic composition of her district? I mean, there can't be that many actual Palestinians there, right?
There's some districts in Michigan that are very heavily Muslim, and I think there are a lot of Palestinians in some of them, and there are a lot of Somalis in Omar's district.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that explains a lot.
Yeah. Now, Omar is definitely inartful sometimes in the way she speaks, but I also think she's been unfairly attacked.
No, I agree, but she also, just between you and me, she seems to have a chip on her shoulder, and there's a sort of suffused anger there that
she's had
explicitly expressed, but it's really annoying.
I don't think it plays well with a certain kind of crowd, but she is an actual, refugee who has had a life very different from mine or yours, and as with Tlaib, I think it's like not an act. I mean, she's a hard ass. She's like, I don't know, Muhammad Ali or somebody who's like, whoa, boxers didn't used to talk like this. People in Congress didn't used to talk like this. Sometimes in history that happens, and it's not a terrible thing.
I put AOC more in that category.
Oddly, AOC, of the three, I maybe have most issues with her.
Really?
In a way. I just think she's gotten the most kind of uncritically adulatory press from the left, kind of. Does that make sense?
Well, from it.
It's like she'll do something like she will read questions at a congressional hearing And the thing on social media will be, oh, she's a genius. She was just reading the question. I mean, look, she's pretty smart. That's fine. But, you know, I don't know.
A lot of congressmen don't have good questions and don't do a good job reading.
Look, if you have good staff, it's probably a sign that you're pretty smart yourself. I take that. But
given the incredible overexposure she hasn't screwed up as much as you would expect a normal person to do.
Well, that may just be you passing judgment on the particular things that Tlaib and Omar have said. I mean, they have ventured into more forbidden territory than she has because they've gotten into Israel-Palestine in a very aggressive way.
AOC talks about way beyond identity politics. She talks about health insurance. She talks about
fine, but that's not the third rail of American
identity politics, and I give her credit for that, even if I completely disagree with her.
Yeah, but I mean, health insurance is not a third rail of American politics. I mean, Israel-Palestine, you can get into very big trouble, and she has been much more cautious than the other two there.
I guess. I mean, you seem to think AIPAC has more power than I do.
Actually, it isn't just AIPAC. I mean, in fact, if you want to get into the details of Omar, she kind of she didn't accurately characterize the nature of AIPAC's power. I think it's not all about the Benjamins. It's a much more complicated. In general, pro-Israel lobbying is a more complicated thing than she said, and I don't know if she she probably understands that or will soon. The more time she spends in Washington, but no, it isn't AIPAC per se. And it's not its money per se either.
I guess here's what I'm saying. A candidate could take a fairly strong Israel skeptical position and still be an important national figure. I think McCloskey was such a person. I may be wrong. There are people who've been like that.
Yeah.
A candidate was very hard for somebody to take an anti-social security position and be a credible national figure. You're just dead if you do that. So in that sense, Israel is not the third rail.
Well, okay, that's true. You're politically dead, but there isn't a systematic effort to stigmatize you in the same way. They don't like, Well,
you're no threat because you're dead.
Right. The sheer politics of that will kill you, so they don't have to mount a campaign convincing the world that you're anti-Semitic or something. Right. No, that's true. And look, I mean, Omar, she, like I said, highly inartful. It's like what was the other comment? It was about just using the word allegiance. I know what she meant, but if you've been around Washington much in that context, maybe not use that word. Right.
I take the Leon Wieseltier position on that.
Why not why not more than two loyalties?
Yeah, why only two allegiances?
Fine, but he can say that. He's Jewish. She runs into more trouble if she gets into the allegiance issue.
But Irish, everybody has dual allegiances, triple allegiances.
No, I agree.
Learn to live with it and deal with it.
I agree. I mean, when Clinton expanded NATO, it was commonplace to say that was partly in response to Polish American voters in the Midwest. And nobody got up in arms and said, you're accusing Polish American voters of having dual loyalty? This is just politics. It shouldn't be outrageous to suggest that ethnic lobbies have power. Is that beeping? Does that beeping mean that, oh, never mind.
That beeping is a maintenance truck somewhere on my vast estate that is probably moving some shrubbery. I'll speak to my foreman about it.
Yeah, will you?
And we'll silence them.
One of the many millennials who labor at sub-minimum wage levels in your
legal millennials, Bob.
I know. Well, let's call them undocumented millennials.
Yeah.
So what else? Oh, we got to mention, we got to plug our newsletters. It's do you think there's any chance anyone's still listening or watching?
I don't know. If we were Joe Rogan, they would be.
They would be. Do you look like Joe Rogan? Do I? You actually look a little like him.
I don't even know what Joe Rogan looks like. I think he's very well built, isn't he?
He's an MMA guy. He's a fighter. He could kick both of our asses.
Okay.
So at the same time. I mean, what?
I guess I do look a little like him.
You do look. You have
Sure.
that intimidating, manly
Yeah.
presence that we associate with Joe Rogan.
I'm
Newsletters. So you now have a newsletter. I have had a newsletter for a while called the Mindful Resistance Newsletter. It is in its summer break, and it may emerge with a new name, but you can still sign up for it, whatever its name will be, by going to mindfulresistance.net and signing up. It's a great newsletter. Have you checked it out, by the way?
It's nice. It's good. Yeah.
Very good. Well, it's going to change, so I'm glad you enjoyed it while it was the way it was.
It's a look into the mind of Robert Wright, so that's why it's good.
Actually, it's going to become a little more like that. It's been, I with all due humility, would say it's actually been more than that. Here's what I say about mindful resistance, and you can go look at the archives if anyone wants to go to mindfulresistance.net. The summary of the week we did at the top was more like what the New York Times classically was than the New York Times now is. It aspired to be a reasonably objective take on the genuinely important stories, and I think it was good.
See, I tend to like the stuff that's not the objective take. There's going to be anyway. I don't know. The summary is telling me stuff I already know. The stuff underneath the summary.
Yeah, but you're 100% news junkie.
Sorry?
You're a total news junkie.
No, everybody knows more than I do. I'm not a news junkie by modern Trump era standards. Everybody on the left knows more about practically every issue that I care about than I do. If you talk about Russia, I'll say something about Russia, and they'll say, "But what about the Joseph Mifsud testimony about the so and so?"
Don't know that stuff.
Amateurs know everything now.
But will they know about the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty or whatever? That's the actually important thing that's happened within the last few months. That you would have read about in the Mindful Resistance newsletter. Anyway,
they'll know that we broke the treaty and we test fired a missile.
Enough about my newsletter.
The point is, it's been very hard to make a living as a writer unless you work for a big organization. Blogging, people thought it had potential. Turned out, advertising model didn't work, as you say. Then the next great big thing I think was pivot to video. That didn't work. Then
wait a second. What do you call this?
As a moneymaker, Bob.
You know how much the shirt cost?
I know, but I know that the I've been to your house, Bob, and it's not a vast estate like the one I'm pointing to here.
Humble man.
Podcasts were the next big thing, and they did make money for a while, but then everybody jumped in. So the next thing is newsletters. The first people in the field actually are making money. I have a friend who has never made much money as a writer. He's a great writer. Now he's making a living and feeding his family off his newsletter. So,
but you don't charge for yours, do you?
Yes,
you do.
I don't charge.
You don't charge.
I don't charge now, and when I do intend to start charging, people will get plenty of advance notice, and there will still be free content they can get even after I do start charging. The interesting thing, there are two interesting things about newsletters. One is they tell you to put I'm with this outfit called Substack, which is a big a newsletter platform.
It's a newsletter publishing startup.
Right. And so far, so good. Their software works very well. They tell you if you come up with something you think is really good and important, okay, not very often, but occasionally you come up with something that takes a lot of work and you think is good, make that free. Don't make that paid. Give paid people all the other stuff that's sort of more conversational and
So let me get the business model clear. People pay for the bad stuff and the good stuff is free.
Correct.
Sounds like a killer. I'm sure this is going to make you
so much, but the bad stuff we make up for in volume. The good stuff is like once a week, once every 2 weeks. The bad stuff is a fire hose of bad stuff. And the bad stuff isn't that bad. The idea is the A content you make free, the B content you charge for, but it's still B content. It's not C content. Okay. So, that's the model. And it's interesting. So it solves the dilemma of nobody will read when I have something good. No, the good stuff you have is free. The B stuff you charge for.
So the people who like you enough to want to read your mediocre stuff are the people who will pay. That makes sense.
Correct. You milk those people for all they're worth.
If I were you, I wouldn't put it quite that way, but we will certainly get this video out to your would-be subscribers.
Like that before. No, I mean, it's more conversational. It's like this conversation we're having now. It's not something you want as, gee, this is one of the best things I've ever done, but you're dealing with issues. You're talking about things that people are interested in. They can think for themselves on the basis of what you say and react to that. So it's all good, but it's not like I'm putting this on my resume. Okay. And it's not like you can still intervene in the debate. It lets you still reach people who don't pay for it. The second thing is there's an actual model of journalism behind it, which is that eventually, reporter A with his little newsletter and his followers who's making some money will link up with like-minded reporter B or writer B with his little newsletter, and they'll start to reform like-minded communities, aka magazines, except they will be on a solid financial basis without any of the infrastructure costs. So you don't have a building, you won't have secretaries, and so.
Wait, I missed the first part of that. How's this going to work? Run that by me again. I just literally missed it. I just literally briefly thought about who was calling.
Writers with newsletters, writers finally, in theory, find a way to at least partly support themselves. Okay,
right.
So, and then they can, but there are these lone operators, which is lonely and boring and not productive. So they will find like-minded souls, say fellow neoliberals or fellow mindful resistors or something, and you will find they will join forces so there'll be 5 writers who basically agree on their outlook, and there'll be maybe a website linked to them so you can get it, or maybe.
But wait, will they each have their own newsletter? They will each have their own newsletter?
Well, I don't know what happens, but they probably all join into one bigger newsletter. So you basically recreate the little print magazine on a stable financial basis that doesn't depend on a rich patron and doesn't have any of the infrastructure costs, but you still recreate a viable journalistic organ that's more than one person, that's an actual organization.
Okay.
Put it on a solid basis. As the dinosaurs of the print era, including maybe the New York Times, are dying, this new form will come to dominate. So you'll have the New Republic again, but it'll just be in a completely ethereal presence. Just 10 writers who agree with each other. Okay.
So there's going to be a magical reconstitution of the magazine?
Correct.
Well, I hope it happens. Do I have to do anything to be part of it, or I'll just be swept up in the magical dynamic?
Swept up in the magic. You're a late adopter. We'll.
But I'm not. I have a newsletter. I had a newsletter before you did. Hey, what's your subscription? Do you want to know what my subscription is? My circulation.
I have 1,400 subscribers now.
You want to hear my number?
I do want to hear your number, Bob.
13,800.
That's quite a few.
It is, but as you well know, there's a difference between total circulation of a newsletter and open rate. Do they give you the open rate on Substack the way MailChimp does? Now, our open rate is much higher than the industry average, but it's probably in both of our interests not to tell people how low the industry average is.
No, you want to tell the people how low the industry average is.
The industry average is 20%. Okay. Open rate.
I beat that.
We beat it by a long shot.
I beat it by a long shot too.
We beat it by a longer shot.
Well, yours is bigger than mine, so there's no way I can.
Thank you. I think that's exactly the note we should close on. No, actually, we should say one more thing, Mickey. Not to suggest that your promotional instincts leave you somewhere shy of the P.T. Barnum level, but does your newsletter have a name?
Kausfiles.
Well, you might mention that.
Okay, it's called Kausfiles. It's
okay. And so if people Google Kausfiles in Substack.
Yes, I think if you Google Kausfiles, the newsletter is the first thing that pops up now.
Then you also, as
go to
we
the Twitter feed.
as we wind down and into self-promotion mode, you also have a Twitter feed at, what is your Twitter handle?
Kausfiles.
Mickey. I am Robert Writer, Wrighter on Twitter. What else? Well, there's this thing. This is on Blogging Heads TV. There's also Meaning Life TV. And people can subscribe to the Wright Show podcast feed, or they can subscribe to the Blogging Heads feed, the Meaning of Life feed. These are 3 different feeds.
But you don't have a line of cookware like BuzzFeed.
We're getting there. Does BuzzFeed have a line of cookware?
Yes, that was like one of their major profit centers for a while. And I think it's winding down, so they're in trouble.
Like, what model is working in media now? So the New York Times and the Washington Post are special, and we've talked about them. The Washington Post is special in a different way. There's a lot of people who subscribe for financial reasons. Maybe that's true of Financial Times too. But what beyond that, are we basically seeing slow motion failure of like BuzzFeed, Slate? The Atlantic has heavy philanthropic subsidy for the time being.
Although they don't actually seem to die. I remember when I was at Slate, there was like a no gloat rule. When Salon goes under, we weren't allowed to gloat, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, Salon is still around. They haven't gone under a decade later. So if Salon doesn't go under, who's going to go under? Nobody's going to go under, right? There'll always be some rich guy or some misguided person who thinks they're going to make money on it to fund them. So none of these things are going to die. They're just moving to a philanthropic model.
The Pacific Standard
economic model seems to be newsletters. Pacific
Standard just died. How many viable newsletters are there? How many people are making money off of newsletters?
Well, that's the thing. The market's going to be so crowded, it's going to be like podcasts that people aren't going to make money. I think they're probably 100 at least that are making that much.
Really? They're really making money. I mean, serious money.
I'm talking about like more than $30,000 a year.
I mean, enough to keep the proprietor alive.
Right. I'm not talking about 100,000. I'm talking about 30, 40,000.
Can you name 3 of these newsletters?
No, I can name one of them.
What is that newsletter?
Richard Rushfield's The Ankler.
Ankler?
Ankler. It makes, he has a virtue, which is he appeals to one industry, the entertainment industry, that has a lot of money, that can deduct the expense of it, and that passionately cares about who's up and who's down and who's screwing who in this industry because their livelihoods depend on it, okay?
That model doesn't help you or me.
No, the immigration field is not nearly as lucrative. But there are political newsletters that make money. There have been for years. There's FTC Watch, watching the Federal Trade Commission. That's a professional operation. People have a vested financial interest in knowing what the FTC is doing, right?
Yeah, there's that kind of thing. But again, none of that is is of any help to us.
No, but you put the. I guess maybe
the Mindful Resistance newsletter has a Patreon that's not nothing. It's more than $20,000 a year. Did you know that?
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
No, I mean, so maybe the model is is there a model where you put the guy who follows Congress and has a congressional following together with the guy who follows the entertainment industry, together with the guy who follows something else, and you put all these together and you get some positive benefit out of it?
No, I think disaggregation is still the story of our time, so no.
Okay. Anyway, I just thought it was heartening that there was an aggregation narrative that they try to sell you at Substack.
Oh, is that their narrative that magically?
It's their narrative, and it's sort of inspiring. It makes you feel like you're not just part of this horrible disaggregation trend.
Yeah,
you're creating a new future that might be good.
Yeah, it is inspiring. I got goosebumps while you're talking about it, but then I reflected on it and thought, not so much. Anyway, if it happens, great. I hope I'll be swept up by the magical dynamic. Anything else you want to plug?
Now we know how Wexner felt when he met Jeffrey Epstein.
Wait a second. I'm having to wrap my mind. Who is Epstein in this metaphor?
I'm Epstein, I'm afraid.
Okay, then I'm happy. I'm happy with that. Of the two, I would take Wexner, I guess. But you're not supposed to. You shouldn't joke about this. So let's stop it and let's Stop the recording before we get into more trouble. Who do you think has gotten into more trouble this time? Me? Probably me.
I always get into more trouble.
No, you're already in trouble, but I'm not. And that's the real peril of even talking to you.
You have a pedestal to fall from.
Exactly. Whereas you are in the gutter. Can we end on that note of agreement, notwithstanding our many differences?
No, I don't. I disagree with that. I'm peacefully here in the retirement home. I'm ready we're going to have a sing-along soon. And,
right.
and sort of Tai Chi classes, and it's all going to be fun.
Oh, it looks like someone's approaching you to give you an IV, Mickey. We better call it a day. I say hi to that nurse.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. See you next time.
Yep.
Bye.